My favourite thing about the Payday franchise isn't what you might anticipate from knowing me. I love the lore and the characters, but that alone wouldn't be enough to keep me playing all these years. No, for me, the secret sauce to Payday is its build crafting. I've made more best build videos than I care to remember, and I mean that. People are still reminding me about ICTV Anarchist to this day. But with mostly fond memories of Payday's many metas, that nostalgia has been palpable for me in recent weeks, so I've decided to take a step back through the years to relive every major meta Payday has ever seen. This video is predominantly going to focus on the meta weapons, skills and perk decks that have defined different eras of Payday. I'll be starting from Payday The Heist with its 3 weapon loadouts, and moving all the way to modern day Payday 3 where one gun rules the roost. In the process, I'll be showcasing what the community at the time perceived as the best way to play the game on its hardest difficulties. I won't necessarily cover every minuscule improvement, such as individual skills receiving buffs, melee weapons getting slight upgrades, or most bugged releases, such as that time they accidentally made us move like Sonic the Bloody Hedgehog whilst holding the minigun. But I will be looking at the core of what defined the meta of each era, be that weapons which broke the damage curve, or perk decks that made us unkillable. This is what it's like to play through every Payday meta in the series' 14-year history. Back in the halcyon days of Payday the Heist, build crafting was barely formed, and outside of weapon choice, equipment and team boosts, there isn't a whole lot to deep dive into. That's why the Payday Heist weapon meta is so important. Well, surprisingly enough, the AMCAR of all things absolutely rules the roost for normal difficulty, given its ease of use and one-shot potential, even at the game's launch. For overkill, you are looking to prioritize the Bronco as your primary source of damage. Despite only taking up the handgun slot, this thing is pretty much the only thing in the game tipping it in the heister's favour on harder difficulties. With the third highest base stopping power in the entire game, and the ability to one-shot all standard light and heavy SWATs, as well as tear through dozer faceplates back when they had their spaceman get-up on, the Bronco is a breakpoint machine. A sluggish reload speed attempts to keep it in check, but with the heist's much more reserved spawn rate and deadlier enemies, that one-shot kill potential is like gold dust for heisters. As such, the meta primary, the M308, actually ends up functioning as more of a support weapon to maintain your Bronco's ammo reserves. I wasn't able to experience it at its best here without the reflex scope unlocked or max damage from sharpshooter class progress, allowing it to one-shot headshot heavy SWATs, placing it in a similar category in terms of functionality to the Bronco. But even without hitting those key breakpoints, it's undoubtedly a consistent weapon to switch into when the Bronco needs its almost 5-second long reload animation to play out. In Payday the Heist's tertiary slot, at launch, again, this weapon is unlikely to compete with the Bronco, but the Mach 11 appeared to be most people's go-to option. Against beat cop health pools, this thing shreds and does well enough as an emergency reserve ammo pool in most close-range situations. This was your quintessential setup for pre-Wolfpack DLC high-difficulty Payday the Heist, likely rocking either medic or ammo bags, depending on the team's requirements. However, that all changed following the introduction of the GL40 with this game's only major paid update. Suddenly we had access to a weapon that could actually one-shot shields, who were a massive issue back in the day with no alternative methods to take them down outside of flanking their sluggish turn speed. Not only does the GL40 circumvent their defenses completely, it can one-shot almost everything else in the game with a direct hit, including the dozer faceplate. Obviously, it's held back by its low ammo capacity, single loaded grenades, and a lengthy reload time for each, but given the lack of any real competition in that third slot, it effectively power crept all other options out of existence. Finally, team boosts offer somewhat minor buffs to your crew, and as a result, I'm not sure there's ever been much of a fixed meta, but as I understand it, and a huge shout out to Bay1K for his assistance in fact checking this list, the big game hunter boost for team ammo supply is the go-to option, at least these days. The Payday the Heist meta is about as straightforward as it comes, and actually reflects one of the elements of the game I truly appreciated whilst replaying it recently. It simply stuck to its guns and remains much the same as it always was. Predating the live service scramble means that the heist will forever be this special game. The same can't always be said of Payday 2, which experienced multiple vast shifts in design and balance philosophy over its 10-year update lifespan, leading to some of the most bipolar metas of all time. Some fun, some not so much. Starting at the very beginning, the beta and update 1 meta was also one of the most iconic. Keeping up the heist tradition, it was a secondary, not primary, that ruled the roost back in the day, with the locomotive 12-gauge shotgun being a cut above just about everything else. With shotguns getting access to overkill, which has always been an excellent skill, this thing raced ahead of its competition, especially thanks to the strange, full damage pellets shotguns fired as a result of that iconic diesel engine jank. Even without the addition of specialised shotgun ammo, far later in the game's DLC cycle, the Loco seemed to star in just about every build you'd see online. In terms of primary, we weren't exactly spoiled for choice, meaning the options were less clearly defined. The Car 4 wasn't quite into its heyday just yet, so whether this was driven by Payday the Heist muscle memory or not, the M308 also rose to the top of the usage lists. DMRs have such a storied history with these sorts of games, with one-shot kills on standard SWAT always being useful, and without all the utility options of modern-day Payday 2, it always made sense to prioritise pure damage. Skills were also far from fully formed back then, with Ghost almost entirely reserved for stealth, and utility options such as C4 and saws generally outperforming Sustain from the medic tree. As a result, the iconic Tech Forcer build was formed, as ICTV tankiness was a no-brainer in Loud, with concealment not factoring into builds, and perk decks a long way off releasing. Of course, Dozer faceplates back at launch were also immensely tanky, closer to what we see in the other two Payday games, meaning a common strategy at the time revolved around abusing trip mines, due to the strange way explosive damage seemed to interact with the Dozer's many destructible parts, often one-shotting the big guys and taking the heat off the assault wave. This will always be one of the most nostalgic ways to play the game for me, although the playstyle has aged quite poorly, despite buffs to DMRs a few years back. Sadly, the heist design moved away from the more roleplay focus of launch, with the destructible doors and safes often replaced for more universal objectives, making these C4 builds far less effective on average than they once were. In the months that followed, not too much changed, as although we saw some variation in primary usage with new ARs, LMGs and snipers all added to the game thanks to Gage and his weapon pack DLCs, the meta still revolved around the locomotive, especially after the shotgun pack added ammo types, meaning the primary you chose sometimes felt like window dressing. The Thanatos was uniquely strong against Dozers, and sniper penetration gave us a genuine option against shields, but it's safe to say upon its arrival in February of 2014, we didn't have access to a whole lot to actually contend with Death Wish. Grenades were added to all DLC builds in late 2013, but made a fairly small splash for such a large franchise debut, and even in the advent of unique melee weapons, for its speed and utility, the vanilla weapon butt remained the top choice. This all changed though with one of the most innocuous DLCs of all time. The Gage Mod Courier Pack, released in April 2014, added many multicolored packages around the heist for us low attention span heisters to grab. Importantly, picking these up unlocked a swathe of stat warping attachments that finally enabled assault rifles to feel good to shoot by achieving viable accuracy and stability stats long before they changed the equation to 100-100. Most importantly, it pushed the Car 4 over that 40 damage breakpoint, which was pivotal for Death Wish before numbers were vastly inflated later into the game's life. This thing instantly outperformed the underwhelming LMG class, which lacked the ability to aim down sight. With top tier weapon handling stats, in addition to an ideal damage spread, the car would essentially monopolize meta builds for the next several dozen updates. The Loco also held on to its place in most builds, especially with the advent of the Gage Shotgun Pack in July, bringing specialised ammo types for more damage or greater utility against shields. The general Tech Forcer template would remain top tier until late 2014, but it really was the Car 4 that dictated the pace for most of the year, all thanks to a bundle of weapon mods, finally helping most of the hardcore community to unlock their Death Wish masks. In the lead up to October 2014's first annual Crime Fest, the meta had started to stagnate, with top tier heists such as Big Bank and Hotline Miami doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of player retention. Weapons competing for the Car 4's crown emerged, but never really came close to taking it away. That was until Crime Fest and Hoxton's return to the gang warped the way builds worked forever. Perk decks, designed to give every heister a distinct survivability option, opened space for far more damage-centric build crafting, and with new skills arriving in Hoxton's Fugitive skill tree to support more aggressive, dodge-focused playstyles, the days of armor supremacy were now through. With Low Blow and Sneaky Bastard, high concealment builds, even in Loud, became increasingly popular, with the Car 4 and Locomotive still offering plenty to these suit playstyles. However, rightly or wrongly, in that secondary slot, it was the newly added Judge revolver shotgun that grew to become the community's darling. With ultra-high base concealment at a time when weapon attachments were hard to come by, and unrivaled utility with HE rounds from the shotgun pack, this was the ideal sidearm to pair with a concealment-focused AR like the Clarion. DPS-wise, not much in the game could compete with crit damage, and even playing in the modern framework of Payday 2, I can feel the leap in power when playing this build. Alongside Rogue, a perk deck that passively provided a ton of dodge, requiring no player input to run optimally, suddenly every meta build was absolutely rapid and a little more mindless to play. You see, FAKs and Swansong, also added over Crimefest, gave us ways to play like lunatics and still get away with it, whilst an early version of Bullseye at the top of the Fugitive tree opened up the concept of armor gating, albeit with a weaker 3-second cooldown back then. Melee was also slowly getting there, with options like the Novice Shank actually providing a direct upgrade to the weapon butt, only to be power crept by the Trench Knife a few months later. The Hitman perk deck and akimbo weaponry released as a bit of a damp squib in terms of meta builds, but certainly laid down the groundwork for some of the strongest setups in the game much later on. This might be one of the largest leaps in terms of game meta we ever saw, also splitting the community between those who valued the slower paced, more Payday the Heist inspired playstyles of launch, and those who felt that Deathwish was finally an accessible difficulty after all these buffs to the player. But you don't get to escape the Carrefour for long in this video, as the AK and Carrefour Mod Pack DLC added more exclusive attachments for Almir's favourite son, including a damage boost with no downsides to keep up with the breakpoint curve. The Butcher's Barbecue pack in March 2015 attempted to make a dent on the meta with the powerful Stakeout 12 gauge and addition of incendiary damage, however it wasn't enough to overthrow the king, and Dragon's Breath rounds wouldn't see much play without a significant buff which came later. Instead, the Carrefour locomotive lovers just couldn't stop winning, especially when Sokol arrived with the Grinder perk deck in June of 2015. Previous character additions had failed to move the meta away from Rogue's effortless effectiveness, with most decks being too complex or gimmicky to make a dent, until Grinder came along and offered effective immortality against the comparatively limited cop damage of the day. Who needs to dodge when you can lifesteal through all incoming damage by dealing any instance of damage yourself? At release, with a full deck, you could stack up to 40 hit points of healing per second by dealing consistent damage over a 4-second period, with the only trade-off being that you couldn't run armor tankier than the lightweight ballistic vest. Just ridiculous numbers when you think about it in the context of Deathwish at the time, basically God mode in DLC form, allowing you to run just about anything else in the game and still get away with it. If we're still talking pure meta though, sadly it needs to be the Carrefour yet again, this time slotting into a crit build for even more impressive damage. The Molotov throwable was also brought in from the Barbecue pack, not only for its best in slot area denial, but also its damage over time effects synergizing with Grinder's healing trigger. The Buzzer also arrived with the Golden Green Casino Heist, providing a fully concealable melee weapon with a guaranteed stun effect, the de facto best melee option to this day if you're not built into Bloodthirst or Sociopath, in which case the Katana from Jiro's edition in July wins out. This might be the most powerful the player has ever been in Payday 2 relative to the cops, but as you can tell from the gameplay, that didn't last for long. In August, Grinder was cut down to size, providing less max healing per instance of damage, admittedly for a longer duration, but pivotally proccing 0.5 of a second less frequently, meaning it was impossible to just stack up uncontestable healing. Playing with it now, it simply feels weaker than Rogue did in my opinion, although is far from a useless build, still providing best in slot healing, just more passively, making it better suited to lower difficulties. As such, Rogue stepped right back up to the plate as an untouched meta option as we headed into the excitement of 2015 Crimefest. If you know your Payday history, you'll know that excitement quickly turned into rage, as with the advent of weapon safes, the expectation was that the meta would now revolve around paying hand over fist for weapon skins with specific rare boosts. Fortunately, in the background, Starbreeze had just rebalanced effectively every weapon in the game, moving to the 100-point system for accuracy and stability, which finally knocked the Carrefour Loco combo off its perch, with some massive buffs to older weapons and nerfs to select shotguns. Somehow, in the midst of a massive loot box pay-to-win scandal, some of the biggest winners were free-to-play weapons that had been in the game since launch. SMGs and revolvers had a new lease of life, but most significantly, so did the M308 and Deagle. Suddenly, DMRs felt amazing, and they just happened to turn these high damage pistols into pocket DMRs. With the ability to reach both 100 accuracy and stability, these god guns turned back the clock, reinvigorating the single fire meta of old. Admittedly, a lot of the game's weapons were viable at this time, with Death Wish truly solved by now, meaning the build variety was about as good as it's ever been. Explosives like the GL40 were popping up thanks to surprising concealability, and perk deck variety was starting to emerge as people essentially burned out on the simplicity of Rogue. This was the status quo for months, as the only real meta-defining addition was the Ice Pick from the Point Break DLC. This thing remains the best damage-dealing melee that still provides max concealment, ideal for those bloodthirst dozer deletions, although the ex-President perk deck didn't have quite the same level of lasting meta impact. A quiet start to 2016 followed as the meta remained surprisingly diverse and healthy. Bubbling away following a small balance pass in March, Armorer was buffed to receive 1.5 seconds of damage immunity every time your armor broke, something that would propel the deck to the top of the tier list in time and kickstart a trend of immunity skills totally warping the meta. However, as they say of London buses, you wait an age and then two come at once, as somehow Anarchist, released in May, one of the most meta-defining perk decks of all time, was overshadowed by Update 100 and its complete revamp of skills. Whilst Anarchist's importance can't be understated for long, after just a couple of months to get to grips with it, in August everything changed. Key skills were now much easier for builds to access, and massively meta-defining additions arrived to change the game. Frenzy was one such skill, although it didn't function quite how it does today. Instead of trading health and healing potential for a 25% damage reduction, you drop 70% of your HP to only take 40% damage from all sources. Paired with Berserker, which actively rewards you with weapon damage for being at low health, as well as the now infamous retired specialized killing skill, providing over 30% additional free damage for just running suppressors, suddenly crits felt optional. That means in steps a generational ICTV Anarchist build. Not this rubbish I showcased long after the skills were changed, I mean the original ICTV Anarchist, trading health for extra armor to the point that your functional pool of resistance was pretty much boundless. Running anything but suit Anarchist these days is sacrilegious, but in 2016 this was the god we worshipped. Weapons stayed much the same as they had since Crimefest, with DMRs, pistols, and of course the ever-powerful HE Judge still ruling the roost, but finally we saw a return to the tank meta. It just so happened that cover was now optional, even on the game's hardest difficulties. Nowadays, with Frenzy nerfed, this sort of build feels very hard to sustain, although you can still feel the bones of what made it so elite, especially on lower difficulties. On something like Mayhem, ICTV Anarchist can still trivialize most damage coming your way. Quickly though, this skill was changed. First to only provide resistances to your health bar, massively nerfing its utility with Anarchist, and later into the much lower full damage percentages we get to play with now. But little did we know, on the horizon, an update was about to arrive that made these player nerfs a living nightmare. In October 2016, during the major annual update event, One Down, the original version of what we now know as Death Sentence, was added to the game. Instead of a modifier we could switch on or off, this was a true game difficulty, giving all players just one chance to be revived unless they interacted with the medic bag, pushing them back up in the meta to stand above FAKs. This mode also introduced the Zeal Squad, SWATs and specials with massively up damage, but more importantly, health pools, invalidating about 90% of the game's arsenal with sheer tankiness. A lot can be critiqued about One Down's initial implementation and its unhealthy approach to difficulty in a game that thrived on build variety, but with that monumental step up in challenge and untimely death of so many previously meta builds, we needed to get creative. The answer, in a strange turn of events, had arrived years prior in the Gauge Chivalry pack. Crossbows were suddenly the top dogs, abusing their incredibly high single target damage and concealment stats, with the light crossbow in particular rising to the top, alongside a heavy utility secondary such as the China Puff, a solid grenade launcher added in the Wolfpack DLC earlier that year, which could be equipped with explosive or incendiary frags depending on what you were missing. Despite the power of armor at the time, even as cops got stronger, Rogue and its dodge focus remained broadly just as strong and RNG based as ever, littering the meta once more and probably contributing to the perk deck's somewhat tarnished reputation these days. This build abused every overpowered skill in the game at the time just to get somewhat even with the cops, as body expertise and pre-nerf 9-second long swan song turned each heist into a medic bag jamming, dozer deleting, objective forcing mess. In general, direct combat had been discouraged by the health pool inflation, making jokers passively more powerful, and the newly added concussion grenades an invaluable tool for stunning groups of cops rather than actively engaging them. Overkill didn't approve. Crossbows were hit a couple of weeks after one down release, losing 50% of their damage across the board, whilst the headshot multiplier when playing on Mayhem and above was also increased by 50% in an attempt to revive the regular ballistic weapons that had been languishing since one down was introduced, trying to maintain that high skill ceiling with the targeted headshot buff. Crossbows remained in and around the meta even with half the damage, and never went away completely, even after they were changed to no longer function alongside body expertise, requiring far more accuracy to make the most out of. With a certain degree of mastery, these are still incredibly rewarding weapons to use, and despite its notoriety at the time, I did enjoy reminiscing for this one. However, new, more direct ways to play started to open up on the hardest difficulty after these balance tweaks. Anarchist, in its pure suit form, which prioritised armor gating over the pure RNG of dodge, took off in popularity, and we've never looked back. If you were deviating from the crossbow builds, you were almost certainly rocking something with a suppressor, and with suit Anarchist supporting both crit and berserker builds, our damage potential was suddenly off the charts. In November, we received an additional utility option in the Arbiter, as crowd control secondaries were all the rage at the time, but more importantly, from the Gauge Spec Ops pack, we got the Speed Pull magazine, simply the best attachment in the entire game, which essentially segregated any AR or DMR type weapon that could access it into a league of their own for years to come. It took about 6 years to get nerfed, but even this weaker variant is still very solid. As such, the M308 started to lose popularity in favour of DMR kit assault rifles, offering the best of both worlds. To avoid bringing up the Car4 again, I'm using the AK DMR variant here, another absolutely top tier at the time, in a build that could easily be mistaken for a modern one, even if it would be slightly more off-meta these days. Just a month later, Scarface was added to the game, although Kingpin, much like Stoic later on, didn't have the uptake you might expect given its immortality providing properties, but was and still is undoubtedly a top meta option after they changed it to a health rather than armor focused deck, much like the Commando 101 rocket launcher, which also arrived in that update. The Commando might quietly be the best weapon in the game, but I don't recollect it seeing universal play across one down at the time, at least not until its damage buffs in 2018. Also, I think these throwable consuming decks just required a little too much reading from us at the time, preferring the simplicity of pick up and play Rogue or Anarchist. This was the start of some serious perk deck power creep though, as for every biker type release, there was now a Kingpin coming to the game to right those wrongs. Sicario was another excellent perk deck added in May, which never really hit the meta heights, but was undoubtedly a more consistent version of the ever popular Rogue. Oh, and they added the 5.7 armor-piercing pistol in April, a totally unique weapon, stealing that sniper niche of being able to shoot through solid surfaces, rapidly becoming a meta tool across every build, looking for a non-explosive way to handle shields, whilst also providing excellent concealability, again leaning into the tendency of the era to prioritize damage over defense and embrace risk. One weapon that typified this was the ISMA shotgun. Despite being in the game since launch, I find it hard to really pinpoint when or what specifically allowed this monster to take over, but second only to the Car4, this has to be the most iconic meta primary in the game. With a ridiculous number of attachments allowing it to fit into the ever popular crit builds, this thing was an absolute monster of a shotgun, especially if you wanted to move away from the more measured DMR build. Hell, after the buffs to Dragon's Breath rounds in late 2016, it could even be run as a fire and forget machine, back during the good old days when fire had the chance to crit. I'd be remiss not to mention this beast, although I struggle to recollect exactly when it took that meta crown. I can tell you it existed amongst those upper echelons for many years to come though. That's not even getting into the Henchman update, also arriving in April 2017, giving crew AI the ability to wield particularly powerful weapons like snipers or shotguns, whilst also making them much more effective and tanky than most actual co-op players. 2 players, 2 AI remains probably the easiest way to play the game, especially with the crew boosts, a set of passives that the player receives just for playing with these guys, which scales in effectiveness depending on how many AI crewmates exist within the lobby. At the same time, with the emerging ability of these AI crewmates to carry in terms of damage, another style of play was emerging in the wake of a perk deck I believe to be the most forgiving in the game's history, arriving in October 2017. Stoic, another deck tied to your throwable, with even more text to try to comprehend, that was actually worth the effort of learning. It traded armor for health and made it so that all incoming damage would be received over time instead of directly, a huge boon for eating up the spike damage of one down. Even better, all you need to really learn was when to time the press of a single button to turn yourself into an unkillable god that abused all of the game's many sources of healing exceptionally well. This was the first deck that saw one down and didn't automatically cower towards medic bags or 9 lives, such was its indestructibility. Unfortunately, as your health pool was heavily tied to your armor type, it lacked the ability to make proper use of those meta crit and berserker skills, meaning although this deck was amazing, it wasn't a great fit for the guns we were mostly using, although that would change very soon. In the meantime, we also received the Brothers Grimm for free during the Lock and Load event. These akimbo shotguns were even better at abusing the fire and forget damage over time of Dragon's Breath rounds than the Isma, turning the entire screen in front of a heister wielding them into an unmissable wall of damage. One of the easiest weapons in the game to switch your brain off and abuse. Hell, I even covered these things back in the day in what I think was a surprisingly effective build video for the time, also showcasing Sociopath after its buffs as an armor-gating alternative to Anarchist, which also had an inbuilt way of dealing with dozers in the coolest way possible via melee damage. It's a bit of a sleeper hit if I do say so myself, although not quite meta-defining. Clearly, I fell off in 2020. Anyway, all meta creativity was about to fly out of the window with the ludicrous LMG buffs that arrived in December 2017. Whilst the newly added Union 556 was busy killing off the Car 4, the longest standing meta option I can think of, there was an even greater travesty taking place. I don't think we've ever seen targeted weapon buffs to this extent before or since. I'm talking 3 times the damage, 1.5 times the ammo pickup, and even improved accuracy to make them less reliant on bipods. These things rapidly went from unusable to utterly overpowered without needing skills to really excel in terms of DPS, meaning Stoic was now free to step in and be the de facto LMG perk deck. The KSP in particular rose to the top of the list and quickly found a companion in the form of the Compat 40mm grenade launcher added later that month. For whatever reason, in the same patch the LMGs were buffed, grenade launcher damage was nerfed, only for the Compat GL to arrive a couple of weeks later with 1300 damage per grenade like nothing had changed. Baffling balance as a new king and queen of the meta that still undoubtedly hold up today had arrived, in what has to be the easiest build to play I've featured so far. Unfortunately, this move to defensive play was somewhat cemented in the months to come. An admittedly deserved 3-second swansong timer nerf made staying on your feet much more important, and with LMG surviving 2018 unchanged, it was always tempting to just bunker down and tank up when facing the hardest difficulty. Which, by the way, was about to change in and of itself entirely. From March onwards, instead of 1 down, we'd now be dealing with Death Sentence, with the potential to double down and bring back that 1 down effect via an optional modifier. The goal with this new difficulty was to keep it on a similar overall level of challenge, whilst altering just what made it so hard. Enemy health pools were cut down by 1/3, but their aggression and tendency to flood the map was increased, with spawn caps up across the board. Minigun and medic doses were imported across from the crime spree mode to ensure a few bullet sponge enemies remained, whilst cop damage stayed mostly the same. The reduced health pools did help make more weapons viable, which was the core aim of the update, but the further descent into emphasizing Payday 2 as a horde shooter was polarizing. The ability to kill at a faster pace or absorb more damage became crucial. Unfortunately, having a negative impact on perk deck variety, seeing as dodge builds were passively nerfed as more potential sources of damage means testing your luck even further. On the plus side, specialized killing was removed from the game, a staple skill that had felt like a required skill point dump in the past. In its place was Graze, a single skill at the top of Mastermind that turned snipers from gimmicky, slow DMRs to superior weapons in virtually every way, especially as crowd control was becoming essential. Now, snipers were able to deal AoE damage, scaling up to 100% of a successful headshot, enabling total spawn wave clears in a single button press. The Contractor 308 added back alongside the John Wick heist in February 2017 jumped to the top of the admittedly competitive pile, as it had that familiar DMR feel, whilst also gaining access to the ridiculous power of Graze. This type of build is excellent with damage skills that feel most accessible using Anarchist, alongside a high DPS SMG such as the CR805B from the Biker Pack to burn through those Mega Bulldozer health balls when necessary. This remains one of the most enjoyable, high-skill playstyles to this day, and existed alongside mainstays like Armourer, which was also decent with Greys, and the increasingly popular Stoic and Kingpin. This meta ebbed and flowed, sort of achieving the intended effect of the developers as updates slowed whilst the Overkill team aimed to round off the story and move their focus towards the Walking Dead game. Joy and the Hacker perk were added to the PC version of Payday 2 midway through the year, an incredible deck that was admittedly buggy at first, but would eventually grow to command the meta, comfortably taking the spot of the strongest dodge perk deck in the game. And that's very much the state the game remained in until that dramatic conclusion at the White House. Until Overkill's The Walking Dead flopped emphatically, and we entered into the revival era of Payday 2. Power creep was the name of the game during those initial DLC packs, so desperate for uptake were the devs. 2019 was remarkably quiet, but starting from 2020, DLCs such as the Cartel Optics mod pack buffed most concealment builds, with the M60 and R700 both pushing the boundaries of their respective weapon categories simultaneously. It would, however, as much as 2020 me wanted this to be the case, be tough to say this warped the meta in any significant way. This was simply a feature of most of this era's weapon packs, often providing something uniquely powerful to tease out a purchase without necessarily screaming pure pay to win. In fact, the most significant meta changes all came entirely for free. After a year of not salting the earth in 2020, Starbreeze, now trying to shake that Overkill title, decided 2021 would be the year of pure experimentation. In February, a weapon balanced beta version of the game was created with some much needed buffs to the DMR category of weapons, buffing their ammo pickup tremendously and giving the likes of the Car-4 and M308 one final lease of life in a number of meta setups. However, they didn't glow quite as brightly as the already top tier Contractor 308 did. Somehow, the best sniper in the game received a universal buff, reinforcing the aforementioned Grey sniper build as the best in the game. This change was reversed quickly, as you might have guessed. However, one highly unpopular change that didn't see a reversion was the damage range multiplier update, officially going live in March despite community protests. Conceptually, this was designed to make weapons fit into more idealized niches and give the team more values to tweak when creating future unique options. Essentially, all weapons were given a damage multiplier in either a positive, neutral, or negative direction, depending on its ideal usage range. A fine idea, I imagine, for launch Payday 2, but not really in a post-death sentence world where cops flooded the heist and all weapons are intended to be some shade of viable. They had little to no impact on the meta, as the best weapons, the DMRs, ARs, and most importantly snipers remained functionally untouched, whilst more fringe options were negatively impacted. The first of many war on shotgun updates we'd see during this period pushed players even further towards Dragon Breath reliance. Fully auto pistols, such as the Akimbo Strike 18Cs, actually benefit from the DRM changes initially, starting to see even more play as DPS powerhouses alongside the increased uptake of Hacker. Shock damage was introduced in May, leading to the creation of a few niche stun-focused builds, but nothing truly meta-warping. In fact, a tiny 20% buff to Muscle's health offering in June was more impactful, specifically because it also accidentally applied to Kingpin, buffing that already top tier deck even further. Then we got the Cash Blaster in August of 2021, an event weapon to celebrate the game's birthday that has probably the most broken stat spread in the game. It remains a temporary addition, but every year around August and December, you can trivialize some of the hardest achievements in the game with this flamethrower hybrid that stuns and melts every unit in the game simultaneously. Speaking of temporary metas, for a couple of days when the Kang Arms Model 54 pistol released in September, it had no fire rate cap on its underbarrel shotgun feature, meaning Bulletstorm could break it completely, matching that insane Cash Blaster DPS. In the same patch though, it was the Assault Rifle class that was the real benefactor of Starbreeze's recent tendency to buff everything. The biggest winners were the Bootleg and Lion's Roar Assault Rifles, old character pack weapons which received massive improvements across the board. The Lion's Roar in particular saw buffs to its ammo capacity, reload speed, and crucially a massive extra 20 points of damage, making it uncontestably the best standard AR for most builds in the game. At the same time, the Lebensauger 308 sniper rifle received buffs to help it compete with the Contractor, with the two still holding that graze build monopoly with an iron grip at the very top of the meta. Shotguns also took another hit in this patch, getting functionally worse again for no particular reason, whilst LMGs were chipped away at with ammo pickup nerfs, just accentuating the new role ARs were now intended to fill. 2 months later in December, Leech was added, warping the DSOD meta in much the same way Stoic had previously, allowing the player to functionally pretend they weren't playing on the hardest difficulty by making all sources of damage effectively the same by splitting your health bar into sections that could be refilled when picking up kills. Not to mention, you can literally revive yourself with this deck, something that's effectively impossible to balance given the power level of other options in the game. Unsurprisingly, this was nerfed in February 2022, making it slightly worse for DSOD, but still ridiculous all things considered, bolstered by the fact that it could be run with a suit setup, giving it that versatility Stoic lacks. The pendulum swings again though, as by April it was the SMG weapon class's time to receive some long-awaited buffs. In particular, this impacted the Akimbo SMG category, which rapidly grew to become the go-to DPS option for most fully auto crit builds, owing to their ammo pool no longer holding them back. These remain some of the best weapons in the game in 2025. The Viper grenades, on the other hand, a gas-type throwable and launcher ammo type, took the meta by storm initially, before a slew of nerfs left them in a still usable but far from meta state. On release in May though, these things turned the entire heist into a green haze, spreading and dealing both damage and stun effects through walls to further incapacitate the cops, as if pocket ECMs weren't already doing enough to hold them still. On heists with localized spawns like No Mercy, these gas grenades pretty much trivialized the entire DSOD experience, meaning all you needed to do was focus on keeping dozers in check. Tombstone slugs for shotguns provided a similar effect, added in September 2022 as an alternative to Dragon's Breath that never quite managed to take over, but did still have a few specific pros. The VD-12, a shotgun that came with an Akimbo variant, took over the shotgun meta during the same update, and remains a powerful option even after all those years of shotgun nerfs. They paired nicely with hacker setups, allowing you to remain at close combat ranges, which, unbelievably, was about to get even stronger as a perk deck in October. Fixes to how the pocket ECM was always intended to function made it comically broken, applying the stun effect as you move around with it whilst active, enabling it to stun all enemies for a much longer duration and in a functionally wider radius, lobotomizing most cops on any heist at a single press of a button. By this stage, it was almost certainly the best deck in the game, even for online play, where it had felt a little inconsistent in the past due to the desync. Copycat, the final new perk added to the game, arrived a couple of months later, functioning uniquely as it could be customized to provide a mix of specific stat boosts and passive effects based on the pre-existing perk decks in the game, opening up some really fun and interesting build paths, whilst also offering ways to improve popular playstyles, as the Copycat variants of many perk decks were outright superior to their regular alternatives. Copycat Biker really stands out in particular as an almost meta alternative to a terrible base game deck. This was also the first time the stealth meta actually changed in a very long while, as the stealth variant of the deck is particularly strong alongside options such as Yakuza or Hacker. As we were nearing the release date of Payday 3, things did begin to slow down in terms of meta-defining updates. In the third McShay weapon pack released in February 2023, we received the Akron, a fine weapon that was utterly broken in the hands of the AI. Now a team of 3 crew AI teammates can pretty much solo DSOD, so long as you're willing to be their objective bot as the clankers have taken over. At the same time, a new 3-round burst weapon, the very interesting Rodian assault rifle, arrived bugged, being able to pierce shields but only in burst fire mode, making it effectively a sniper crossed with a DMR and meta until patched. In March, launchers finally saw nerfs to their ammo pickup rates, with Viper grenades losing an element of what made them so dominant in that heist-wide spammability, as the 5.7 resurfaced as the most popular secondary once more. Then in April, Starbreeze made the mistake of releasing a first truly concealable LMG in the form of the Campbell, a gimmick weapon with an underbarrel flamethrower that wasn't balanced around being able to access crits. With the right sort of low detection risk setup, this thing was an absolute menace, closing off the final heist in Crude Awakening in style. That was it for Payday 2, for a while, until the infamous update 240.3 in November 2023, which brought some truly perplexing changes to the game. Undocumented nerfs to things like Dragon's Breath shotguns, which no longer activated the overkill skill, something that would take almost a year to revert, or not reapply in their stun effect. Tombstone might even be the superior ammo type for shotgun builds at this point. Shock and Awe was also nerfed, making anti-shield utility even more necessary, as if the 5.7 needed any more usage. Cops also seem to be far better at pushing the player after spawning, frustrating the hell out of me on challenge runs, but also making higher kill per minute builds marginally more effective. This was also the one and only update to nerf Akimbo SMGs, only instead of tackling their damage, they just made them crash everyone's game from time to time. Which brings us up to modern day Payday 2, with the only updates recently removing, not adding, new content. However, whatever AK meant about potential Payday 2 content updates for the future still remains to be seen. Right now, I'd say Akimbo SMGs are just so much easier to pick up and play with that they're dominating player usage stats when they're not causing crashes. My personal choice has to be the Akimbo CR805Bs alongside Hacker, which remains utterly busted. Snipers are also still monstrous thanks to Greys, and LMGs, ARs and DMRs fall somewhere just behind them. Perk decks like Stoic, Kingpin, Anarchist, Leech, and to some extent Copycat all remain top tier, with slightly off-meta decks like Armourer or Crew Chief still providing more than enough on DSOD to see their first share of utilization. The meta is okay, I would say, at least in terms of build variety, but it would also be fair to say it has seen better days, so I am hopeful things will change somewhat in the not too distant future. But now, we're going to have to take a quick step backwards in time to the release of Payday 3 in September 2023. This game, despite its well-treaded issues, can't be faulted for attempting something different, trying to harness elements of Payday The Heist and 2, but going its own way at launch with an attrition-based difficulty system. Resources were deliberately restricted and hard to come by, meaning every heist was a race against the clock to escape before you ran out of ammo, or worse, armor plates. As such, crews at launch would stack full armor bag skills to get as many refills as possible, whilst the heaviest armor was the most popular, simply because it gave you additional plates to mess around with from the start of the heist. In terms of weapons, much like its predecessors, we quickly searched for whatever guns could hit key breakpoints. In Payday 3's case, this was the one-shot kill threshold on heavy swads, which, with Edge active, could be activated by the VF7S, an AR with DMR-like stats. In the secondary slot, following a similar logic, the meta was to run the Castigo revolver, another one-shotting weapon that was much easier to handle than the Bison. The new overkill weapon system really boiled down to calling in as many Red Fox sniper rifles as possible, specifically to deal with dozers who were admittedly tough otherwise. Skill variety was also a little disappointing, with most builds revolving around edge uptime to activate damage or utility skills like ammo funnel and replenish. There were essentially 3 builds in the game, one for stealth, one for ADS, and one for hipfire, all of which worked ubiquitously across all weapon setups, as concealment was now a thing of the past. In all honesty, if you want to know how little has changed in the long run, just pop on this build from launch and see how familiarly viable it still is. Updates to the game came at a snail's pace, so this meta got crusty real quick, until in December Transporter arrived, a new skill line that allowed you to carry multiple bags at once, a key mechanic on 80% of the game's heists. Nerfs to armor up and buffs to skills like Hardy and the entire Negotiator line followed, in addition to armor repair kits, with Clean Slate arriving and making lower plate setups much more viable, putting a little less stress on armor bag resources, although they firmly remain the meta option. The weapon meta didn't change until the big Adrenaline update in early 2024. This new Fortitude skill line, based around health and overhealing, arrived alongside a 7-point max skill cap increase as the player grew more powerful without any cop pushback. This meant that 2 primary loud builds didn't really change, it's just they now also ran a full suite of Adrenaline skills. In terms of armor variety, you either lent into the hugely buffed health build with a single armor plate setup, or used the newly added adaptive armor, which didn't take permanent damage so long as you prevented it from breaking. With a skill like Plate Up, you could sort of armorgate again with an almost anarchist-like playstyle. This in mind, survivability options were now plentiful as Starbreeze had lost control of the resource economy and attrition was a thing of the past. Overkill, still the game's hardest difficulty, was a comical breeze at this point, not helped by one of the least tested buffs I've ever seen. Precision Shot was changed to give scope weapons a massive permanent damage multiplier when fired with edge. This made the SA-A144 DMR, the M308's spiritual successor, the best weapon in the game by a country mile when ran with the 5x scope. One-shotting almost every unit, even to the body, one of the easiest metas to dominate in Payday history. This was the case for several months before Precision Shot was changed again and the Adelig assault rifle, added in the previous patch, took over the crown of best weapon in the game. The The player base has started to move towards a more adaptive armor-focused playstyle, and an ultra-consistent AR with the ability to one-shot just like the VF7S, but with vastly superior handling stats, was the perfect killing machine to activate those instant ammo pickups. The game would stay in this state for the best part of 2024, with our godlike primary eventually joined by a pair of equally monstrous secondaries from the Fear and Greed DLC, in the Gostini Viper and Jackknife, a pair of pistols with ridiculously rapid time to kill rates. This meta wouldn't change as a result of any nerfs or newly added weapons. In fact, it's still an incredibly easy way to play the game. No, quite inexplicably, it was a buff to a weapon in December 2024 that had been in the game and balanced for an entire year that totally unsettled everything. In general, the shotgun buffs were a huge positive for weapon variety, if it weren't for the FSA somehow managing to get in on the act. This semi-auto beast could now one-shot kill most units in the game, even to the body. With that sort of shot-to-kill ratio, this thing's ammo economy skyrocketed, effectively never running out of shells to spam down range with little to no punishment. So long as you have a secondary that deals with snipers, the shotgun will trivialize any other combat encounter, breaking the game's balance right as Starbreeze finally looked to start improving the cops. In early 2025, we've seen no changes to this core weapon, or skill meta for that matter, although the assassin skill line and suppressors have undoubtedly become more prevalent. With the addition of jacket and overskills in February, this gap between the player and cop power level widened even further as a number of top meta options were added to the game. The minigun, 50 cal or baseball bat overkill option remain equally viable and meta in their own rights, depending on the playstyle you want to emphasize. Armor 2.0, still probably the best executed patch for this game, did help to add some more variety, creating a new plate type which works exactly like Payday 2 armor, as well as adding armor passives and ammo carrying stats to give them each a somewhat unique playstyle. With each frame of armor carrying 1 to 4 plates, you can mix and match the plate type you run, and on the release of this system, the optimal meta approach was to run 3 plates of impact armor, the fully rechargeable type, and 1 plate of resistant, the release plate, which takes permanent damage, but could now be replenished thanks to the 4-plate passive. The reason this was so busted was that you could regenerate all 4 plates with a single armor repair kit, effectively giving you endlessly looping armor, in addition to the bonus resistances of the blue plate type. This style has been nerfed as armor repair kits won't regen every impact plate anymore, meaning you're actually better off just stacking resistant plates most of the time, because 60% incoming damage reduction is genuinely ludicrous, not too dissimilar to the old and notoriously busted frenzy skill from Payday 2. Whilst I stand by this being the actual easiest way to play the game still, it does have a weakness to snipers, which have been buffed as Starbreeze is attempting to address the difficulty problem by flooding the heist with more units and increasing the potency of specials. So online, I see just as many people looking to run single plate builds focused around their fast recovery times and the health regen of the assassin's metal skill. The one thing I have to praise Armor 2.0 for is bringing that much needed meta variety to at least one of the game's systems. The same sadly can't be said of skill or weapon variety, as the FSA remains utterly dominant, voiding the need for any other primary in the game, and until we see Skills 2.0 implemented, I really do think the Grit Edge Rush system has run its course. This build pretty much trivializes the game's hardest difficulty, solo or online, as the meta has swung so far in the heister's favour, I'm not sure you even need to run the best in slot options anymore. And that is us caught up with modern day Payday 3. Wow, that was quite the lengthy trip down memory lane. Thank you so much for hanging in there. Full disclosure, I was there for most of this history and have done some fairly extensive research, but I'm sure there will still be gaps in this timeline I'm simply unable to fill. If you remember anything important or just interesting from Payday's entire meta history, please do fill us all in down in the comment section below. It has been an honour and a privilege, most of the time, covering this game over the past decade, and then some. Which doesn't half make me feel old. I'm looking up at the script for this now thinking, how the hell have I written all that? Payday's a huge franchise with an unbelievably complex history, which is why I'm still holding out hope for its future too. If you enjoyed, please do me a massive favour, check out my Apex Gaming PCs down from the link below. Take care guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.